So, what do you need to know about fussy eating? Or what is fussy or picky eating? What does it even look like? Hi, I'm Dr. Colette Reynolds of Growing Healthy Eaters, and I am here to help grow happy, healthy eaters. So, it's a good question. What is fussy eating? Even experts who study the area don't actually agree what it is. And sometimes we may not realize what fussy eating is. So, from my work with helping to grow happy, healthy eaters, I hear parents tell me about the challenges they have with feeding kids every week. So, to me, fussy eating is three things. I'm going to look at what the kids eat or don't eat, how they eat, as well as the effects of eating. So, what is it that fussy eaters eat or don't eat? So, we, of course, think it's normal that kids eat lots of carbohydrates. But for fussy eaters, there's a huge proportion of carbohydrates in the diet. This means they're filling up on foods such as bread and breakfast cereals. Some kids are quite specific in the type of carbohydrates they eat. Many parents tell me their kids don't eat any potatoes in any shape or form, or some kids don't eat any pasta, or I've seen some kids who don't eat any bread. Often the carbohydrates are very processed. So there's lots of white bread, for example, there's lots of white pasta. And because the diet is quite limited, the kids are eating the same foods repeatedly and very often. Often, people will classify problem eaters or fussy eaters according to the number of foods that they eat. So they might say your child is a problem or fussy eater if they eat less than 20 or 30 foods. So I don't personally focus too much on a number like this, because let's take an example. If there's two children and they both eat less than 20 foods in total. So let's say one child has some variety in their diet. There's some fruit, there's some veg, there's some protein, as well as carbohydrates. But for the other child, they're eating just versions of the same food all the time. So they might be eating just bread and bread products, for example, breadsticks. So when people come to get help for their child's eating, I always ask the parents to do a food log. So this is just a list of what the child or children eat or drink for 3 days. So I suppose the most extreme food logs I've seen are just carbohydrates. And there might be some dairy in there as well, like milk. But for every food log that I see, there's loads and loads of carbohydrates. And the children are filling up on these. And then there isn't space, I suppose, for the other food groups. So there's little or no fruit. There might be little or no veg. Or there might be little or no protein foods. So besides carbohydrates, what do fussy eaters eat or don't eat? So I see that there's little or no veg for lots of fussy eaters. So this means that there's little cooked veg, for example, sweet corn. There may be no raw veg. Carrots actually are the most common raw veg I see eaten. Our veg might be even eaten camouflaged, for example, if it's pureed in a tomato sauce. Kids vary in terms of fruit. Some kids eat a lot of fruit, or they eat a wide variety of fruit. For others, there might be little or no fruit. They might even eat fruit except it's pureed. Some kids don't eat pureed fruit, for example, a baby pouch. And the most common fruit I see is actually apple. Another common feature I see among fussy eaters is that for lots of kids, there's little or no protein foods. For some kids, they eat lots of protein, especially meat, or they might eat lots of particular protein, for example, peanut butter. But for others, there's no meat or chicken or fish, beans or pulses or nuts or seeds. So there's little or no protein foods. Of course, there's exceptions to this. I remember seeing one food log and the child was eating crab claws. So they were living on the west coast of Ireland and they had access to local fish that were coming off the sea. So that was actually very unusual. The child ate very limited otherwise, but did eat crab claws. That's the only time I've ever seen crab claws on a food log. For some kids, they may eat little or no dairy, but some kids fill up on dairy. So there might be lots of milk in the diet, there might be lots of cheese, there might be lots of yogurt. So really, it's a very limited diet, lots of carbs, and then there's often little or no fruit. In some cases, there might be little or no veg in a lot of cases. And in some cases as well, there's little or no protein. And this means that it's a limited and an unbalanced diet over a number of days or a week. So a fussy or picky eater can have a limited number of foods they usually eat. And this is what I call their favorite foods. And they may be quite specific about their favorite foods. So, for example, some kids won't eat all types of flavors of yogurt. Some kids will only eat one flavor of yogurt, and strawberry seems to be the most common flavor. Some kids will get upset if there's a different food offered, even if it's a very similar food. For example, if it's a different brand or flavor of the food. And I suppose long-term habits can get quite easily established. Let's say a child is eating a limited diet for 6 months. Well, then 6 months is a long time, and it's a big proportion of a small child's life. Let's say if they're 2 or 3 years old. So the problem, I suppose, with eating a limited diet is that even if it's our favorite food, the child can get very tired of eating it if they're eating it so often and so regularly. Let's say if they only eat a cheese sandwich for lunch. And the problem is that they get so tired of it that they want to stop eating it altogether. And then if they're not open to other foods, their diet can become more and more limited. So if you're not sure if your child's diet is limited, so why not write down as you go, one day, food log, just a list of what they eat and drink. And then you can see maybe more clearly if there's a limited variety, if there's a lot of repetition of the same foods, for example, toast and bread, or if there's food groups that are missing or very little food groups, for example, little fruit or veg or protein. So how do fussy eaters eat, or what's their relationship like with food? So for some fussy eaters, they seem to have no interest in any food at all or in eating. For some kids, they have no interest, for example, in everyday or healthy foods. And for some kids, they have a very limited interest in treats. For example, they might like only one type of treat. For example, if they like a muffin, it has to be a chocolate chip muffin, the most common flavor. And they have no interest in other muffins. So their parents might think, this is great, my kids aren't really interested in sweet foods. But actually, it may indicate that they're not interested in other foods as well. So I remember one time a mom contacted me about her little boy. And she told me a story about one day at childcare, everyone in the class was offered a jelly to eat. And when she picked up the boy, her little boy still had the jelly squashed in his hand for ages. And he was actually afraid to eat that jelly because that was seen as a new food, the same as other new foods. And it was really scary for him. So I thought this was really sad that he didn't get to enjoy the jelly like the rest of his class. For some kids, they may never be hungry or never seem to be hungry throughout the day or never hungry for meal times. Some parents may feel that they have to spoon feed their kids in order to get them to eat. For some kids, there's very lengthy meal times, for example, 45 minutes, and they still don't eat much. And this is particularly the case if it's foods that they don't really like. Or parents may feel that their kids can only eat with distractions like a screen. And for some kids, how the food appears is really important. So, for example, a child may get upset if they see that their usual rice cake is broken in 2 halves. So the texture might be the same, the taste might be the same, but they don't like how it's a different look. And of course, texture is a big challenge for lots of fussy eaters. So some kids only want to eat crunchy textures that are dry, that are finger foods, for example, dry toast. And this is in contrast to other textures that are wet or soft, for example, soup or porridge, or a mixed texture where there's a number of foods together on the plate, often dinners, for example, spaghetti bolognese. Or some kids only want smooth purees. So they only want, for example, a smooth yogurt. They don't want any bits of fruit in it. And fruit, for many kids who don't eat fruit, it's the texture that's the challenge rather than the taste. So for fruit that's more ripe, it's more wet, it's more soft, it's more messy on their hands. So that's why they don't eat it. And my eldest boy, the texture was definitely an issue for lots of foods. For example, melted cheese on a pizza. He wouldn't eat that because it was too messy, it was too wet, while he'd eat just a piece of cheese, no problem by itself. So some kids want to eat different foods served separately. They don't want to have them touching, for example. So sandwiches are out. Other kids will only eat certain foods when they're camouflaged or they're so well hidden that they don't realize that they're there, especially veg. For example, if they're hidden in a smoothie or in a red tomato sauce. And some kids won't eat, wet or soft textures like smoothies at all. And many kids who are fussy are eating different from the rest of the family. So, for example, they may be eating more kid kind of friendly foods, we call them. So, for example, fish fingers or chicken nuggets instead of, a piece of chicken or a piece of fish. Some kids may be eating different, for example, to their family who are eating a dinner. They may be eating only snacks, for example, a cheese and cracker. Or some kids, for example, are very limited compared to their family. They won't eat anything green. For example, they won't eat any green apples, even though they eat red apples. So what are the effects of fussy eating? There's effects on the child themselves, there's effects often on siblings, and there's effects on parents. So let's start off with some of the effects on children themselves. So most children that I see seem to be growing fine. Now, some parents say their child is a bit small for their age or maybe compared to their peers. But other than this, I see definite effects of limited eating on children's health, especially to do with constipation, which is quite common in kids anyways, but especially common in fussy eaters. So many kids I see may be having ongoing constipation, or they may be on laxatives for constipation. Of course, there may be effects on a child's immunity. Some kids have poor immunity because of their limited diet, so they may tend to pick up anything, kind of any bugs that are going. Or some kids have poor energy because of their limited diet. Of course, the effects aren't always this obvious. Sometimes they're more subtle. So I remember a lady contacted me about her 7-year-old boy. And when we started working together, we discovered that the child seemed to be under a lot of pressure. He felt pressure to eat foods that maybe he wasn't that comfortable with at the time. So once we started reducing this pressure, we saw an interesting change. So this child and the other siblings fought a lot, as is normal in every house. But once we reduced the pressure, the sibling fighting reduced. So it seemed that the child felt possibly frustrated or anxious around meal times, especially dinner, and around foods he wasn't comfortable with. He felt under pressure, and he was letting this out on his siblings. Of course, fussy eating can affect siblings in a family as well. So let's say there's one who's a fussy eater. This can have a knock-on effect on the eating of the other siblings, especially for younger siblings. So let's say that the child that's limited eater only wants to eat sausages and bread for dinner. Well, then the other siblings, especially, as I said, the younger siblings, often follow suit. But parents often come to me with one fussy eater, And then they say that they have concerns that this pattern will actually, spread to their other children. So they want to prevent the habits forming, or else they want, if it has started, they want to nip it in the bud. So what are some of the effects of fussy eating on parents themselves? Parents often tell me that they're eating less well than they used to. So let's say their children only want to eat pasta in the evening and they don't want to make separate dinner, which is fair enough. So they end up eating a lot of pasta very often. They're sick of the pasta. They prefer to eat other foods and a bigger variety, but they don't want to make separate dinners. Of course, in many houses where there's a fussy eater, there are 2 separate dinners being made every evening. So there's food for some of the family, and then there's separate food being made for a limited eater. Parents tell me all the time about how concerned they are about their children's lack of nutrition, how worried they are about their health and about the future. Parents tell me a lot about the guilt they feel, or the sense of isolation that they see maybe their friends' kids who seem to eat everything or eat better than their kids, and they feel very isolated or alone. Of course, there's a lot of stress around meal times, but this stress can affect parents in other areas as well. For example, some parents tell me that they have difficulty sleeping at night because they're so worried about their children. Or it may affect their relationships. I remember one lady telling me that she was arguing a lot with her husband around how best to, help the child's eating. And some parents, I suppose, feel quite helpless, especially if limited eating has been going on for a number of years. So I remember one dad telling me that he felt his 6-year-old was just too old to help at this stage. So other parents feel that as well. They feel that their child is just too old, that they've been in these habits for too long, and that there's nothing much they can do to help them. So we are all so busy in our lives. Having a fussy eater, one or more of your children eating like this, is actually a lot of a challenge that we could really do without. So if you can identify with some of the parts of this video, you're certainly not alone. And I'd like to reassure you that fussy eating or limited eating can indeed be greatly improved. And I think the key to it is by putting in place a process. So a process that's positive, that starts at where your child's starting point is, and that is step by step, it's gradual, so that we bring our children along with us. And in about 4 consultations on average, maybe over about 12 weeks, there can be great improvements in your child's relationship with food and in how they eat and in what they eat. So I'd like to offer you a free discovery call. You can book a 15-minute Zoom call with myself, and we can have a chat about the challenges that you face with feeding your kids, and you can ask me any questions you have about the process. I'd like to thank you for watching all this video, and I'd like to be able to help you grow your own happy, healthy eaters. Bye for now.